think we're all a little worried. If we're not, maybe we should be. You may have heard it's Women's History Month. Despite my enthusiasm for big government initiatives, I gotta say, you go, girls. You go, girls. A world where women feel unappreciated or oppressed is not a world that I want to live in. Probably wouldn't be a very nice place either, for obvious reasons. Use your imaginations. Now, this is church. Our primary responsibility is to the Bible, to God's revealed will, to the example of Jesus Christ. Is this a subject that it addresses? Because there are plenty of people out there who would claim that the Bible is part of the problem and not the solution. They would claim that it perpetuates misogyny, that it treats women as chattel, second-class citizens. Is that true? Do you think it's true? Are you a little bit worried that it might be true? Does the whole subject make you just an eensy-weensy little bit uncomfortable? Good, let's jump right in. Let's do that. No, take a deep breath. Everything's going to be okay. I don't want to blow up the world or myself or anything like that. If you need help relaxing, maybe to imagine a soundtrack to this sermon, it would be Cool in the Gang, Ladies' Night. I read the lyrics. It's very PG. You can dance, girls. You don't have to give it all away, you know. Oh, what a night. All right. Oh, that's just foolishness. With this subject, as usual, it's better to go to the source, see for yourself, instead of listening to people talk. That includes me. I'd like to start in Genesis 1:27. You don't have to turn there. I'm just going to quote it. It says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them." Now, this applies to every person that has ever lived, regardless of gender, regardless of race. You all look a lot like God Almighty. Get your head, 2 eyes, 2 ears, your arms, your legs, all that stuff that it says he has, that we look like him. You look like that. I can see you from here. That's what you look like. I look like that too. Our potential is also the same. Our goal is the same, to be in the family of God, right? We get there the same way. Is there any other way? I'm going to read a scripture here from Acts chapter 4. Acts chapter 4, Peter and John have gone to the temple, and there was the crippled man, and he was miraculously healed, and it was a big deal because everybody knew that guy was there crippled for years and years. It made the priests and the Pharisees, it made them mighty uncomfortable. This is in Acts chapter 4. We're going to start in verse 10, if I can ever get there. Acts chapter 4, starting in Verse 10, Peter's answering the council, "Be it known unto you all, and to all the people of Israel, that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead, even by him does this man stand here before you whole. This is the stone which was set at naught of you builders, which has become the head of the corner. Neither is there salvation in any other, for there is none other name given under heaven among men, whereby we must be saved." Men, women, whoever you are, wherever you are, there's no other way. There's one way, and it's right there through Jesus Christ. God has one eternal standard, one law. It's not a different law for me or for you or for somebody over there across the ocean. It's one standard for all of mankind, one way to salvation. The character that he wants us to cultivate, forgiveness, love, mercy, all these things together. That's the same kind of character he wants out of every one of us. This body is just a shell. This is a cocoon for my butterfly. It's growing right now, trying to nourish it in many different ways. It's temporary, though. It's a tabernacle, right? We're all going to face different struggles, based on these differences, who we are, where we are. We'll have different roles to play, dictated by circumstances that are far beyond our control. But who, what, where, and when you are do not have much impact on why you are. We're going to publish a book about that for the next letter offer, Why You Were Born. It's quite good. In 1 Corinthians 12, Paul writes about the body of Christ, right? And he says, there's the head and there's the hand and there's the foot, and does the foot think it's not part of the body because it's jealous of the head or something like that? We're all part of this body together. Same team here, right? Same team. God is primarily concerned with how we deal with the circumstances that we are faced with more than what those circumstances are. It's the overcoming of them. So let's get to it. women of the Bible, strong, courageous, exemplary, wise women we can learn from. Last week's Line Upon Line, not last night, it wasn't last night. Ken and Stan both on the road. They're having a meeting up there in Cookeville. He's got a good group up there. Hope they're having a good time right now. But before that, it was on the book of Esther. There's an unsung hero in that story, I believe, that deserves some attention, and that would be Queen Vashti. So let's turn to the book of Esther. It's before Job, it's after Nehemiah. If you hit the Psalms, you've gone too far. Esther, starting in chapter 1, verse 3, In the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes, that's King Ahasuerus, all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the governments, and the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days, like 6-month-long exhibition of, showing off his fanciness and all his treasure and all this stuff, right? He's really putting on the dog. Verse 5, And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan in the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. Now he's showing off, and here comes the party. This is the party. This is going to close down his 6-month-long exhibition here. We're going to jump down to verse 7. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel. That means nobody could bother you about it. The drinking was legal, whereas normally, public intoxication, a bunch of folks running around everywhere, running amok. It's not okay. It would not have been okay, but this is the king's party. Everybody's gonna drink as much as they want you, and nobody can do anything about it. This is the king's word, right? For so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Also, Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcas. Carcas is my favorite one. Carcas, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti, the queen, before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore the king was very wroth, and his anger burned within him. The king had been at it for a while, right? It had been a hard drinking time for quite a while here. And I think some historical context is important to this story, because what the king was asking Vashti to do was actually way out of line. And rather than me elaborate on that myself, I'm going to read what's here in the Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown commentary on it, because I think it's better than I could say it myself. So we're going to start right here. It says, As the feast days advanced, the drinking was more freely indulged in, so that the close was usually marked by great excesses of revelry. The refusal of Vashti to obey an order which required her to make an indecent exposure of herself before a company of drunken revelers was becoming both to the modesty of her sex and her rank as queen. For according to Persian customs, the queen, even more than the wives of other men, was secluded from the public gaze. Now, he didn't just want her to be there, be like, look how pretty she is. It was a little bit more than that. Maybe you've taken that from the context here. Sometimes the Bible smooths over these things because it's a little gruesome to spell them out in detail. Had not the king's blood been heated with wine, or his reason overpowered by force of offended pride, he would have perceived that his own honor, as well as hers, was consulted by her dignified conduct. She was honoring him by refusing this idiotic, drunken request that he was making. But he turned to his counselors, right? And these were probably the Magi, without whose advice at the proper time of doing a thing, the Persian kings never did take any step whatever. Let's see. So he brings them all in. They take a big. Somebody seizes an opportunity for favor to make himself prominent and to do something else as well. The combined wisdom of all, it seems, was enlisted to consult with the king what course should be taken after so unprecedented an occurrence as Vashti's disobedience of the royal summons. It is scarcely possible for us to imagine the astonishment produced by such a refusal in a country and a court where the will of the sovereign was absolute. You may remember from the book of Daniel, Darius the Mede, after the Persians came in, his counselors connived to get Daniel thrown in the lion's den, and although Darius did not want that to happen, because he had said it, he had to stick with it, and he let it happen, trusting that God would be able to protect Daniel, and he did. But that's the Persian kings. This is the law. Every word that comes out, it doesn't come back. It's going to be fulfilled, right? So Vashti took a big risk here. The assembled grandees were petrified with horror at the daring affront. Alarm for the consequences that might ensue to each of them in his own household next seized on their minds, and the sounds of bacchanalian revelry were hushed into deep and anxious consultation. What punishment to inflict on the refractory queen? But a purpose was to be served by the flattery of the king and the enslavement of all women. The counselors were too intoxicated or obsequious to oppose the courtly advice of Memucan. It was unanimously resolved, with a wise regard to the public interests of the nation, that the punishment of Vashti could be nothing short of degradation from her royal dignity. The doom was accordingly pronounced and made known in all parts of the empire. Now, this is going to talk about the beginning of chapter 2 here, when his wrath was appeased and all that. On recovering from the violent excitement of his revelry and rage, the king was pierced with poignant regret for the unmerited treatment he had given to his beautiful and dignified queen. But, according to the law, which made the word of a Persian king irrevocable, she could not be restored. His counselors, for their own sake, were solicitous to remove his disquietude, and hastened to recommend the adoption of all suitable means for gratifying their royal master with another consort of equal or superior attractions to those of his divorced queen. That's interesting, is it not? Now, the way that I conceive of the law is a little bit more than the arbitrary command of a drunken king, wouldn't you say? I don't think the Persian model is exactly the best example, or really what God has in mind. The law is equal, it is immutable, it doesn't matter who it is that's offending it, it's the same for everyone. Vashti was in the right, and she risked her life. She forfeited her position, she forfeited unimaginable luxury and ease to remain that way, because it was not becoming of her, and it wasn't becoming of the king either. But he wasn't making a good decision in his drunken state, was he? More than that, this refusal led directly to Esther being queen, to Esther's rise and her being in place. Now, you're probably familiar with most of that story. Mordecai probably wasn't going to bow to Haman. It doesn't matter who the queen would have been. He still wasn't going to do it, and yet Esther wouldn't have been in place to intervene the way that she did. She also broke the law by coming into the king uninvited, and this whole story could have had a very different ending. You know, the polygamy and the excesses of kings and all that, things that show up in the Bible over and over again, even with righteous kings, that is contrary to God's stated will. One man, one woman, becoming one flesh. That's against that. And it's damaging to our interpersonal relationships, and clearly the king, with all his wives and his huge harem and all this stuff, it's not like his sweet one and only wife, bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh. It's not that kind of personal relationship, and it's probably unlikely that he would have jeopardized that relationship if he didn't have, a whole huge harem out there, and he's drunkenly wanting to show off, his favorite, if you will. It undermines the institution, the relationship that is supposed to exist between a man and a woman. Moving on. Another obscure female hero is in 2 Samuel 20. Fair warning, it's not a very nice story, I guess. 2 Samuel 20 here. Joab is in it. If you know anything about Joab, he's a pretty tough customer, right? Absalom had just rebelled against his father, King David. That didn't end very well for him. So David returns to Jerusalem, right? They bring him back across the Jordan River. And the tribe of Judah is the one that brought them back. Well, the northern 10 tribes, they were pretty mad because they welcomed the king back without consulting them. Obviously, the land had some problems with David at that point in time. A lot of people went along with the revolt. If Absalom had won, he would have remained king. That's not how it worked out, though. The northern 10 tribes were Israel. They were mad because Judah brought him back without consulting them. They said, we have more part in the king than you do. We have 10 parts. And at any rate, they argued, and their words waxed hot. People's feathers were ruffled. And a man named Sheba, a Benjamite, took this opportunity to set up a little revolt of his own. 2 Samuel 20, verses 1 and 2 say that. And there happened to be there a man of Belial, whose name was Sheba, a son of Bichri, a Benjamite, and he blew a trumpet and said, we have no part in David, neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel. So every man of Israel went up from after David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah clave unto their king, from Jordan even to Jerusalem. Now, David's guys had about enough of that for the time being. They had just dealt with this. They had only just got back home, and they weren't going to deal with that, so they went after Sheba right away. They went after him, gathering people as they went. Joab does some bad stuff here along the way. We're going to skip that. We're going to get to verse 15. We're going to go down to verse 15 of 2 Samuel 20. And they came and besieged him in Abel of Beth-Maacah, and they cast up a bank around the city, and it stood in the trench, and all the people that were with Joab battered the wall to throw it down. Sheba, he went and he hid himself in this city, right? Then cried a wise woman out of the city, Hear, hear, say, I pray you, unto Joab, Come near hither, that I may speak with thee. And when he was come near unto her, the woman said, Are you Joab? And he answered, I am he. Then she said unto him, Hear the words of your handmaid. And he answered, I do hear. Then she spake, saying, They were used to it in old times, to speak, saying, They shall surely ask counsel at Abel. And so they ended the matter. I am one of them that are peaceable and faithful in Israel. You seek to destroy a city and a mother in Israel. Why will you swallow up the inheritance of the Lord? And Joab was taken aback. He answered and he said, Far be it from me, that I should swallow up or destroy. The matter is not so. But a man of Mount Ephraim, Sheba, the son of Bichri by name, hath lifted up his hand against the king, even against David. Deliver him only, and I will depart from the city. And the woman said unto Joab, Behold, his head shall be thrown to thee over the wall. And the woman went unto all the people in her wisdom. And they cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and cast it out to Joab. And he blew a trumpet, and they retired from the city, every man to his tent. And Joab returned to Jerusalem unto the king. Interesting little story there. The wise woman saved the city. We don't even know her name, right? Of course, there's lots of people that are mentioned for a line or two in the Bible, a prophet here, a prophet there, and you don't hear their names, and yet they did something important along the way. Why her? Why her? Here's a whole city. Why is this lady the one that's going to speak to Joab? She probably had a reputation for wisdom. She's called a wise woman, but she was humble. She called herself Joab's handmaid when she addressed him. She submitted herself to him. Claimed that they weren't in revolt in any way. Probably Sheba just came in there and hid, and that was that. And then all these guys show up. They're going to surround the city. They're going to knock it over. Maybe she had given counsel there over many years. It's interesting that the city is, she says that it's a place that people came for counsel. As an older wise woman who'd been there for a long time, she probably had a lot of good advice to give. Maybe she had the soft touch necessary to diffuse a delicate situation. Could have gone worse, right? Could have said, who do you think you are surrounding our city? Get out of here or we will smite you. There was already a revolt going on against David. It wouldn't have been, it's not a step too far to assume that could have happened. A hot-headed, angry man answer would have been, never mind you, Joab. You get out of here. You're wrong in this instance. And, maybe that would have been true. Many years later, a couple of brave women would take action against an evil woman to save the line of David. And this is going to be in 2 Chronicles 22, if you want to turn there, 2 Chronicles 22. Now, some of these chapters can be confusing because there's a lot of different kings back and forth and all that. There's a lot of names that sound the same, Joash and Jehoash and, so on and so forth. I'm not going to make up any. I didn't make those up, but I'm not going to guess anymore before I do get some wrong. Short version, we're going to start in 2 Chronicles 22, verse 2. 42 years old was Ahaziah when he began to reign, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. His mother's name also was Athaliah, the daughter of Omri. She's the villain of this story here. Omri was a king of Israel. He also walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, for his mother was his counselor to do wickedly. So you're probably familiar with Ahab and Jezebel, right? This Athaliah is his sister, also the daughter of Omri. That makes Ahaziah, the king of Judah, his grandson, right? And so here we have Judah in concert with Israel, even though Israel was going way, way off the path, right? This is at the same time that, where am I here in my notes? This is at the same time that Jehu, who gathered all the prophets of Baal together and cut them off, was sent to cut off Ahab, Athaliah's brother, right, son of Omri. Omri has a big historical reputation. He's in various Assyrian tablets and things like that. He's an important character. He doesn't figure directly into the story other than his line, his family, but he's an important character. That's a good name to remember there. Down in verse 8, and it came to pass when Jehu was executing judgment upon the house of Ahab, and found the princes of Judah and the sons of the brethren of Ahaziah that ministered unto Ahaziah, he slew them. And he sought Ahaziah, and they caught him, for he was hid in Samaria, and brought him to Jehu. And when they had slain him, they buried him, because, said they, he is the son of Jehoshaphat, who sought the Lord with all his heart. So the house of Ahaziah had no power to keep still the kingdom. But when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the seed royal of the house of Judah. Her family is up there in the north being cut off. Her son, his brothers have been slain. What does she do? She kills all her grandkids. She's going to take control right here. It's an evil woman. It's hard to imagine that this is what is going on, in Jerusalem at this point in time, but things had degraded pretty far by then. Let's see. When Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, she slew all the seed royal. But Jehoshabeth, the daughter of the king, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him from among the king's sons that were slain, and put him and his nurse in a bedchamber. So Jehoshabeth, the daughter of King Jehoram, the wife of Jehoiada the priest, for she was the sister of Ahaziah, hid him from Athaliah, so that she slew him not. And he was with them hid in the house of God 6 years, while Athaliah reigned over the land. So, a lot of confusing family relationships here. It's his aunt, she hides her nephew, right? And this baby, and his nurse has obviously hidden him when these killers came in to kill all the children. Pretty gruesome episode. She obviously hid the baby. So then the wife of the high priest, who was the king's sister, takes them to the temple, hides them. Jehoiada, the high priest, he's quite a hero as well. But the nurse, Joash's nurse, stayed hidden with him for 6 years inside of the temple while this woman ran rampant over Judah. That's quite a deal of commitment to take a 1-year-old. You can discern that the kid was 1 year old at the time because they hid for 6 years. Then he's 7 years old when they crowned him king. Therefore, he was 1 year old when this happened. So you hide the baby. Somebody goes in there, has to hide with the baby for 6 years inside of the temple. That's a long time. And a time before there are disposable diapers, I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine. Maybe that was unnecessary. At any rate, a couple of women here risked their lives. The wife of the high priest risked her life to get them out of that situation. The nurse that stayed with him, succoring him inside the temple, she risked her life to do that and also probably gave up quite a bit. She's definitely a hero. God knows her name. The high priest Jehoiada, he also risked his life to preserve the royal line and to return the nation to the worship of the true God. Over here in chapter 23, I'd like to read verse 3. And all the congregation made a covenant with the king in the house of God, and he said unto them, Behold, the king's son shall reign, as the Lord had said of the sons of David. The high priest, here's this woman has taken over. The high priest could have probably snatched power for himself at this point in time as he wanted to. He wasn't that kind of guy. He was a very good and honorable man. Down in verse 11, and they brought out the king's son and put upon him the crown and gave him the testimony and made him king. And Jehoiada and his sons anointed him and said, God save the king. Now when Athaliah heard the noise of the people running and praising the king, she came to the people into the house of the Lord. And she looked, and behold, the king stood at his pillar at the entering in, or on his pillar. Interesting side note there on a corning stone that you may be seeing something of sometime soon. At the entering in, and the princes and the trumpets by the king, and all the people of the land rejoiced and sounded with trumpets, also the singers with instruments of music, and such as taught to sing praise. Then Athaliah rent her clothes and said, Treason, treason! king. It's a conspiracy against her is the way that she's taking it. Then Jehoiada, the priest, brought out the captains of the hundreds that were set over the host and said unto them, have her forth of the ranges, that means take her out of here, and whoever follows her, and let him be slain with the sword. For the priest said, slay her not in the house of the Lord. So they laid hands on her, and when she was come to the entering of the horse gate by the king's house, they slew her there. And Jehoiada made a covenant between him and between all the people and between the king, that they should be the Lord's people. Then all the people went to the house of Baal and brake it down, and brake his altars and his images in pieces, and slew Mattan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. Some insidious stuff had been allowed to creep in and remain there in Jerusalem for a very long time, and Jehoiada got rid of that, at least for a while. For closure, this episode doesn't have exactly the happiest ending, because after Jehoiada passes away, Joash turns aside. That's not so good, right? So we can read that in 2 Chronicles 24, 15 through 19, real quick here. But Jehoiada waxed old and was full of days when he died, and 130 years old was he when he died. And they buried him in the city of David among the kings, because he had done good in Israel, both toward God and toward his house. Now after the death of Jehoiada came the princes of Judah, and made obeisance to the king. And the king hearkened unto them. And they left the house of the Lord their God, their fathers, and served groves and idols. And wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem for this, their trespass. And he sent prophets unto them to bring them again unto the Lord, and they testified against them, but they would not give ear. So that's sad. Joash has this counselor, this wonderful man that looks after him all his life, gives him good, solid advice, good counsel. But once he's gone, Joash caves in to flatterers, to others who wanted to lead him astray. Though that wasn't the lady's fault in this story, they rose to the occasion to do what was required of them, and they're really the ones that set this whole thing in motion. Before we leave the Old Testament, there's a few more that deserve mentioning. The daughters of Zelophehad, they spoke up to preserve their father's name and inheritance. We can read that in Numbers 27. No. Numbers 27, 1 through 8. Then the daughters of Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, of the families of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. And these are the names of his daughters: Mahlah, Noah, and Hoglah, the big one, and Milcah, and Tirzah. And they stood before Moses, and before Eleazar the priest, and before all the princes of the congregation, by the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, saying, Our father died in the wilderness, and he was not in the company of them that gathered themselves together against the Lord in the company of Korah, but died in his own sin, and had no sons. Why should the name of our father be done away from among his family, because he hath no son? Give us therefore a possession among the brethren of our father. And Moses brought their cause before the Lord. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, The daughters of Zelophehad speak right. Thou shalt surely give them a possession of an inheritance among their father's brethren, and thou shalt cause the inheritance of their father to pass unto them. And thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a man die and have no son, then he shall cause his inheritance to pass unto his daughter. That's what the Lord says. That's justice, right? Fair is fair. It's his inheritance. They didn't want their father's name blotted out. They could have kept their peace, though. They could have not spoken up, just got married, gone off with their husbands, and their father's name would have been gone. But the story is preserved. It actually shows up a number of times, and shows up again when they're dividing the land. Miriam, obviously not unknown, the sister of Moses. She's called a prophetess in Exodus 15, verses 20 and 21. I'm not going to read those. Micah mentions her in the word that comes from the Lord, lists her as being sent before Israel along with Moses and Aaron. She watched over baby Moses. I want to read that part, Exodus 2, 4 through 9. Because I like the story. Feels like she's on her own recognizance there. She's somebody that her parents trusted. She did a really good job. Exodus 2, starting in verse 4. And his sister stood afar off, Moses' sister Miriam, to wit, that means to find out what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him, and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter. So she did more than just hide and watch. She inserted herself in the situation. Now, a critical thinking person could divine that this girl has something to do with this baby, or maybe she's not just going to be right there watching and insert herself at exactly the right moment. That's bold, that's because they've been commanded to get rid of all these men, children. The little girl, took a risk. Maybe it was safer for her because she was a little girl, but just the same. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call thee a nurse of the Hebrew woman, that she may nurse the child for thee?" Ooh, that's clever. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, "Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." And the woman took the child and nursed it. So not only did she watch over her brother, she intervened at the right time, and she got her mother paid to take care of her own baby that would have otherwise been slaughtered. That's using the old noggin. That shows some real character there, I think, some real initiative. Who else? Deborah. Deborah was a prophetess. Judges 4. In Judges 4, prophetess and a judge over Israel, Deborah and Barak, of course, can't forget about Barak. Judges chapter 4, starting in verse 4, and Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, she judged Israel at that time, and she dwelt under the palm tree of Deborah, between Ramah and Bethel and Mount Ephraim. And the children of Israel came up to her for judgment. Obviously, she had a reputation. Not only was she a prophetess, but she gave good counsel and gave good advice. And she sent and called Barak, the son of Abinoam, out of Kadesh Naphtali, and said unto him, "Hath not the Lord God of Israel commanded, saying, Go and draw toward Mount Tabor, and take with thee 10,000 men of the children of Naphtali and of the children of Zebulun, and I will draw unto thee to the river at Kishon Sisera, the captain of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his multitude, and I will deliver him into your hand." And Barak said, "If you'll go with me, then I'll go. But if you will not go with me, then I won't go." He didn't want to go by himself. He said, "Deborah, you've got to come with me. I can't do this alone." And she said, "I will surely go with you. Notwithstanding, the journey that you takest shall not be for your honor, for the Lord shall sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." And Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. Jael was that woman's name. She was married to a man who was descended from Moses' father-in-law, called Kenites in here. And while Israel was being oppressed by the Canaanites, her family and her house was at peace with them, and she and her husband, they kind of dwelt off by themselves there. They really had no part in the quarrel. She really didn't need to raise her hand against Sisera. Maybe you remember the story. He fled and he sought shelter in her tent, among she and her husband's house, because they were at peace, and she fed him and gave him what he wanted. He went down to sleep, and that was the end. That was the last nap he ever took. She took a risk by doing that. She involved them in a quarrel that was really not their own. Like I said, they had peace. They had peace at that point in time, but she did the right thing. She struck down an evil man, somebody that had said he oppressed Israel mightily. I'm going to read a quote or two out of the Song of Deborah and Barak here. This is Judges chapter 5. Verse 7 says, "The inhabitants of the villages ceased. They ceased in Israel until that I, Deborah, arose, and that I arose a mother," where the margin says a leader in Israel. Down in verse, not going to lose my place, 24, it says, "Blessed above women shall Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, be. Blessed shall she be above the women in the tent. He asked water, and she gave him milk. She brought forth butter in a lordly dish. She put her hand to the nail, and her right hand to the workman's hammer. And with the hammer she smote Sisera. She smote off his head, when she had pierced and stricken through his temples. At her feet he bowed, he fell, he lay down. And at her feet he fell dead. There he fell down dead. Where he bowed, he fell down dead." Ooh, I butchered a little bit of that. At any rate, this lady took the cause upon herself and saved Israel. They had peace 40 years after that. Moving on to the New Testament. A prophetess, Anna, was one of the first to speak of forgiveness through Jesus. We can read about that in Luke chapter 2. Anna the prophetess. And there's another man, an interesting character named Simeon in the same story. Luke chapter 2, starting in verse 35. Joseph and Mary have brought Jesus to the temple. according to the law. It says, "And Simeon blessed them and said unto Mary his mother, Behold, this child is set for the fall and rising again of many in Israel, and for a sign which shall be spoken against. Yea, a sword shall pierce through thy own soul also, that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. And there was one Anna, a prophetess, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. She was of a great age, and had lived with an husband 7 years from her virginity. And she was a widow of about 84 years. So she had a husband. She got married. She lived with her husband for 7 years. He died. And then she had been a widow for 84 years. So for 84 years she had been a widow. She departed not from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers night and day. And she, coming in that instant when Joseph and Mary are there with baby Jesus, gave thanks likewise unto the Lord, and spake of him to all of them that looked for redemption in Jerusalem." This woman's in the temple all the time, praying, fasting, concerning herself with the things of God. She speaks to everybody that comes there of Jesus, of the Christ, that he is arisen. Simeon, the thing about Simeon is that he had from God that he would not die until he had seen the Christ. Maybe he died shortly afterwards. We don't know. It doesn't really say that. But he bore witness. She believed him. She spoke of Jesus to everyone that came in. By the time Christ begins his ministry, there's an expectation of the Messiah that comes up again and again in the Gospels, that people are kind of ready for it. And it sort of makes you wonder how much she contributed to that feeling. If she's spoken that she's seen him, he's been here, I'm telling you that the redemption is near, that probably had a big effect on the people when they came to the temple, every year for the holy days, for all that kind of stuff. Many women contributed to the founding of the church, of course, and I'd like to read in Romans 16. Paul is kind of signing off here. There's some interesting tidbits. Romans 16, starting in verse 1. "I commend unto you Phoebe, our sister, which is a servant of the church, which is at Cenchrea, that you receive her in the Lord, as becomes saints, and that you assist her in whatever business she has need of you. For she has been a succorer of many, and of myself also. Greet Priscilla and Aquila, my helpers in Christ Jesus, who have for my life laid down their own necks, unto whom not only I give thanks, but also all the churches of the Gentiles." Phoebe here. Phoebe gets called out. She's obviously a lady who gets things done. Paul tells everybody else, you help her. She's got it going on. She knows what to do. You help her. Priscilla and Aquila. I always think of Aquila from the Jungle Book, right? The name of the head wolf. That's a digression. They're also mentioned in Acts 18, verses 1 and 3. They were tent makers. They left Rome when the Jews were kicked out. Paul was also a tent maker. They worked together with him. Priscilla is often mentioned before her husband. I think one time when it's the other way around, the commentaries say that it should be rendered the opposite way. They suggest that it's because she's the one who helped the most, that she was more integral in supporting Paul and helping with the church-type stuff. I'd like to read Acts 18, starting in verse 18. This is about Priscilla and Aquila. Acts 18, starting in verse 18. "And Paul after this tarried there yet a good while, and then he took his leave of the brethren, and sailed thence into Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila, having shorn his head in Cenchrea, for he had a vow. And he came to Ephesus, and left them there. But he himself entered into the synagogue, and reasoned with the Jews. When they desired him to tarry longer there with them, he consented not, but bade them farewell, saying, I must by all means keep this feast that comes in Jerusalem. But I will return again unto you, if God will. And he sailed from Ephesus. And we had landed at Caesarea, and gone up, and saluted the church, he went down to Antioch. And after he had spent some time there, he departed and went over all the country of Galatia and Phrygia in order, strengthening all the disciples. And a certain Jew named Apollos, born at Alexandria, an eloquent man, and mighty in the Scriptures, came to Ephesus. This man was instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in the Spirit, he was zealous. He spake and taught diligently the things of the Lord, knowing only the baptism of John. And he began to speak boldly in the synagogue, whom when Aquila and Priscilla had heard, they took him unto them, and expounded unto him the way of God more perfectly. And when he was disposed to pass into Achaia, The brethren wrote, exhorting the disciples to receive him, who, when he was come, helped them much which had believed through grace. For he mightily convinced the Jews, and that publicly, showing by the Scriptures that Jesus was Christ. Priscilla and Aquila took it upon themselves, after hearing Apollos, who did not know anything about Jesus Christ, he knew only the baptism of John, to show him the full picture. They both helped to instruct him, and he went on to do a pretty great thing. People who had believed through faith, he knew the Scriptures so well that he was able to contend with the Jews and prove through that Jesus was the Christ. You know, I like them. They're a couple. They work together. That resonates with me because we were designed to be together, to be a team, to be one flesh as God intended, one man and one woman. Christ confirms that in Matthew 19:6. I won't read that, but he does. You know, in the beginning it was not so. What God has joined together, let not man put asunder again, right? The Bible catalogs many things God does not approve of because it's an honest record and because we can often learn as much from bad examples as we can from good. So sometimes when it passes over these things, you know, polygamy or, you know, different sins and stuff that you see even occurring in the lives of good people, it's not because it necessarily approves of those things, but it's because it's an honest record. It's not pulling any punches. It wants you to know the whole story. I'd like to read in Luke chapter 11. Just two verses here, Luke chapter 11, 27 and 28. Christ has been speaking. And it came to pass, as he spake these things, a certain woman of the company lifted up her voice and said unto him, Blessed is the womb that bare thee, and the paps which thou hast sucked. But he said, Yea, rather, blessed are they that hear the word of God and keep it. That says a lot right there. Blessed are they that hear the word of God and keep it. Women as well as men. You know, in this, I think there's a powerful indictment of this veneration of Mary in this to, you know, put someone up. You know, what Christ said about who is my mother and my brother, who is my mother and my brother, and them that hear my words and they keep them. And that's the standard for every single person, right? So where does that leave us where does that leave this struggle to assert our rights over one another? You know, who benefits from creating this conflict, whatever it may be? It's only evil that benefits from that. You know, a lot of hay is made out of Paul's statement in 1 Corinthians 14, let the women keep silence, right? I would encourage you to read that whole chapter and keep it all in context. Corinth was a very rowdy place, and he criticized them for a whole bunch of things. Church wasn't exactly like it was now. You can see that pretty obviously in the Scripture. Like when Paul travels around, they say, hey, new guy, what do you got to say? You come up here, say whatever you want. Obviously, that ended up causing a lot of problems that let a lot of bad things in as well. But he pretty much let everybody in that church have it in one way or the other, one way or another. You know, he said that when they came together, that every single one of them had something that they just had to share, and it wasn't necessarily for the edification of the group, but they all had a song that they had written or a poem. They all wanted to have their piece and their say until it just went on and on and on, and you don't get anything from it other than a vain display. And that's not the goal. I mean, that's not the goal of us coming together. You know, we discuss things, Bible study, we learn from each other. Of course, we share all that, but it's not just a free-for-all for anybody to get up all the time and say whatever they want. That's not how it's supposed to happen. You know, what did Paul say at the end of that? He said, if they will learn anything, let them ask their husbands at home, right? That was in verse 35. You know, you've probably been in a classroom setting, school, college, or something like that, and one person that doesn't understand and is loud about it can divert the whole thing, can't they? One person asking question after question after question takes up all the time. Teacher can't give the lecture. Everybody can't learn. Doesn't that kind of sound like this a little bit? You know, you can't just speak up all the time and interrupt and stop everyone because there's something that you don't understand. You know, it's for the benefit of everybody. Therefore, if you have a question, maybe you should ask about it later when, you know, it can be addressed personally. You can get your answer. There's no denying anybody of anything that they need to know. It's just the proper way of going about it. And that has always resonated with me in the context of this. Because the other interpretation doesn't, you know, is it consistent with everything that we've read, that women have nothing to contribute ever at any point in time, can't learn from them? I think we've just read a whole bunch of scriptures that say quite the opposite of that. I'd like to read Isaiah chapter 3. starting in verse 1. Isaiah chapter 3, starting in verse 1. Get to chapter 3, and I'll be at verse 1. For behold, the Lord of hosts, doth take away from Jerusalem and from Judah the stay and the staff, the whole stay of bread and the whole stay of water. Verse 2. The mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet and the prudent and the ancient, the captain of 50 and the honorable man and the counselor and the cunning artificer, the workman, and the eloquent orator. And I will give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them. And the people shall be oppressed, every one by another, and every one by his neighbor. The child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient, and the base against the honorable. When a man shall take hold of his brother, of the house of his father, saying, Thou hast clothing, be thou our ruler, and let this ruin be under your hand. In that day he shall swear, saying, I will not be a healer, or a ruler, or a helper, for in my house is neither bread or clothing. Make me not a ruler of the people. For Jerusalem is ruined, and Judah is fallen, because their tongue and their doings are against the Lord, to provoke the eyes of his glory. The show of their countenance does witness against them, and they declare their sin as Sodom. They hide it not. Woe unto their soul, for they have rewarded evil unto themselves. Say you to the righteous, that it shall be well with him, for they shall eat the fruit of their doings. Woe unto the wicked, it shall be ill with him, for the reward of his hands shall be given him. As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee cause thee to err, and destroy the way of thy paths. A lot of this hits pretty close to home, doesn't it? And how does it all begin? How does it start happening? Men have forfeited their natural responsibility that they have towards their wives, towards their families, towards society, to step up and do the right thing. They've given in to their most base appetites, to laziness, to evil influence that only want to destroy every good thing that God has created. And there's a grievance industry out there in the world that thrives on pitting people against each other. Different races, different nations, men and women, rich people and poor people. You know, we all get frustrated at times, and it's a sad proclivity of ours to blame someone or something else rather than the person who could do the most about it. And not that there aren't real problems that need addressing, but even righteous indignation can be put to very terrible use. Look at the English Revolution, look at the French Revolution, look at the Bolshevik Revolution. Where do these things go? Empowering government tends to lead to oppression. Do not allow yourself to be manipulated. There is an agenda out there that wants to turn us against each other. Now, Women's History Month has as a predecessor International Women's Day. It came from the suffrage movements in the early 1900s, and it was part of the socialist program. Jimmy Carter upgraded it to a week in 1980, and Congress gave it a whole month in 1987. And we're talking about this today because it is part of our government's agenda. You will hear it in school. I heard about it from my daughter who heard about it in school. You'll see advertisements for it. National parks, the military, places that receive federal funding will have events. You can look them up online. There's a lot of them. You can go check all that stuff out. Now, we can honor women. We can talk about their heroic deeds and their contributions, and there's not any shortage. Okay? We've been through quite a few of them today, maybe too many. The clock tells me I've been up here too long. There's a lot of women we didn't go over today. Hannah, Ruth, Abigail, any number of Marys, a whole bunch of Marys. But don't forget that we are on the same team. We are not pitted one against the other. I'm going to take a couple quotes from 1 Corinthians here. It's not going to take too long. At our mutual responsibility. 1 Corinthians 7. First Corinthians 7, let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband. And likewise also, the husband has not power of his own body, but the wife. Defraud means deprive, not ye one another, except it be with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency, or your lack of self-control, as the margin says. In chapter 11, another few togetherness verses. Chapter 11, starting in verse 1, Be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. Now I praise you, brethren, that you remember me in all things, and keep the ordinances, as I delivered them to you. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. And in verse 8 and 9, For the man is not of the woman, but the woman of the man. Neither was the man created for the woman, but the woman for the man. However, verse 11, Nevertheless, neither is the man without the woman, neither the woman without the man in the Lord. For as the woman is of the man, even so is the man also by the woman. But all things of God. And that's the conclusion, right? Are we going to exist separately? That's not the way it works. That's not how it happens. That's not how it is. And I am sorry if you would prefer it that way, but it isn't. We have to deal with things the way that they are. You know, our responsibility is not just to one another. We have a mutual responsibility towards God. Man is supposed to be the head of the family. Through the ages, that's pretty much been a physiological imperative. I'm sorry if that's offensive to anyone, but often man messes that up. It's true. We mess up a lot. Original sin, Eve made a big decision without her husband. Adam listened to his wife instead of God. Who messed up? Everybody messed up. We're supposed to be a team, and it's not a decision they made together, right? We're supposed to be a team, and in that context, is there a limit to what a woman can contribute, or accomplish? Wisdom, knowledge, comfort, counsel? Can you do business? Can you succeed? Can you make a name for yourself? Can you be a good person? I'd like to close with Proverbs 31, because it's so obvious. Proverbs 31, and then I'll get down from here. I'm going to start in verse 10, Proverbs 31, starting in verse 10. Even though the first part is pretty important as well, particularly Lemuel is believed to be Solomon. There's some advice in those first 9 verses that he didn't take. Verse 10, though, Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband does safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works willingly with her hands. She is like the merchant's ships. She brings her food from afar. She rises also while it is yet night, and gives meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. She's doing business, she can do what she wants, right? She girds her loins with strength. That's a funny expression for a woman, right? And strengthens her arms. She perceives that her merchandise is good. Her candle goes not out by night. She lays her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. She stretched out her hand to the poor. Yea, she reaches forth her hands to the needy. She has enough for her family, and for those that are in need as well, right? She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She makes herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes fine linen and sells it, and delivers girdles unto the merchant. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. She looks well to the ways of her household, and eats not the bread of idleness. Her children arise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but you excel them all. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain. But a woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. So go get it, ladies, but don't forget, you got to earn it, just like everybody else.